question and they want to look back later.
Thank you, because I was looking at it and I was like, all right, we need to do homework stuff. I'm confused.
All right, so let's jot down what we've got working here. Okay, so here, if we were not told that we were doing law of cosines, we'd still know we had to do this because I don't have a corresponding angle and side, so I wouldn't be able to use law of sines, at least not right away. So
Wow.
what we're going to do here is we're going to say, okay, I have angle C, I have sides, little a and little b. So since I'm trying to solve the entire triangle, I need everything else that I don't have yet. So I say, okay, I start looking at the formulas from my note sheet, and I go, well, I have angle C, so that tells me that's the formula I'm going to use. So I'm going to be looking for C. So C squared equals the sum of the squares of my two sides minus 2 times the product of those two sides times the cosine of my angle. Okay, that formula is not going to change for my first step, no matter what. So once I have that, let's go ahead. Let's look at everything in full effect here. All right, pull this over. Now, there's things that could happen on the calculator, so let's make sure nothing happens bad here. So 5 squared plus 8 squared minus 2 times 5 times 8 times the cosine. Oh, I didn't check my mode. Degree. Oh, good, I can still get away with it. Okay. So double check, make sure you didn't lose a multiply or lose a plus or minus somewhere. We're looking good. Okay, we hit enter, we get this answer. Now remember, that's C squared. So to get C, I need to take the square root. And again, if I want to use the exact value, I want to use the answer key. So if I'm using this calculator, could I type this in and basically get the same answer if I didn't, know where that answer memory key is? Sure. But here, I'm going to go ahead and get that, and I'm going to find out that C is right around 4.6. So I have that now. I've got that right here. So now, once I get this out of the way for a second, now I look and I say, okay, now that I found side C, I have a corresponding angle and side. So that was my first step. My second step now is I can start using the law of sines. So I've got the sine of my angle over my newly found side, and now becomes the part that becomes critical. Because when we were doing the notes back on Monday, the next part said in big bold letters, use the smaller number in the proportions. If you used 8 here, you're not going to get the same answer that I did. We need to use the smaller value in our proportion, and since that corresponds with angle A, that's what we're looking for. So once I get here, we talked about how I'm cross-multiplying. Now again, just to show this step, because maybe we got into a little too much of a speed game on Monday, I'm going to multiply those two together. We'll multiply these two together. And then since I'm trying to get the sine of A by itself, because that's what I'm trying to find, I'm going to divide by 4.6. And we talked about before how basically every time with one of these I can multiply these and then divide by whatever's with my sine. And that's what I'm doing here. So I'm going to take this fraction, I'm going to plug it into the calculator, so 5 sine of 32, and we talked about the need to either remember to close your parenthesis or to just hit enter and then divide by 4.6, which is probably a good idea. Okay. And I get this decimal. Now, the odds of my angle being a decimal are not real good. And then I'm like, oh yeah, I'm looking for this. So I need to do the inverse. So second sign, because I need the inverse. And again, either type the decimal in or use the answer button. And I end up getting my angle A, which is 35.2, which at that point, again, I can plug that in here. And I don't have to go through this whole process again because I know I have a triangle and I have two of the three angles. So my last step is to take 180 minus the sum of my other two angles. Oops, 112, 12.8. And that would be my angle B.
30.
What's that? 30? Okay. So there's a lot of little things that can get you here. But always, 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 if you have an angle and two sides that neither of them correspond to it, the only thing basically you've got to realize is, okay, I'm going to be looking for this angle's corresponding side. So that's how I figured out the C. And then you're just squaring the other two sides and adding them up. And then minus 2 times the product of those. That's the part you've got to deal with at the very beginning. And then just remember, when it's dealing with your law of sines, it's always the smaller value. So it's just a couple of things that can kind of throw you for a loop here if you're, if we're not real careful. Now, if we take a peek at 30, move this up a little bit. So for 30, it says use the law of sines, law of cosines, or the Pythagorean theorem to solve ABC. We don't know going in. It can be whatever. So let's see. So first question. Now, is drawing a triangle for this probably a good idea? Yes. Okay. Not worried about it being to scale, but I do want to be able to visually see what's going on. So 96, 39, and 13, because I know an angle and its corresponding side are always diagonal from each other, okay, or cross from each other. So that's going to be my little b. What seems like the easiest part to find next? There should be an obvious thing because we still need to find side A, side C, and angle C. Yeah, because if I'm trying to find angle C, I already know what two of these are. So if I look right here, that's just going to be 180 minus the sum of the other two, which makes C 45 degrees. So check, there's one of my parts. Now I go back and look, and I'm saying, okay, well, what am I going to do now? I've got a corresponding angle and side, angle and side B. So once I got that part done, and I'm just numbering my steps so you can kind of see the progression that I'm working through. If ever I have a corresponding side and angle, that's what I want to deal with next. So I've got the sine of angle B, which is 39, okay, over its side. Some of you are like, okay, now pressure's on. I only have angles. So is it going to matter which one I do next? When it's dealing with the angles, it's not. So, it really doesn't matter which one I go to. Because I'm going to have to do both of them anyway. So let's just do A. So we'll do the sine of 96 over side A. Okay, because the only time we're really going to be able to shortcut is on the angles. We're going to have to work through this way to find the sides anyway. So here, I'll cross multiply in the diagonal that doesn't have my A, and I'm going to divide by what's in that. So move this over here. clear that out. So 13 times the sine of 96, now divided by the sine of 39. So 20.5 is going to be my side A. Move this over here. And then the only thing left for me to find is going to be side C. Now there's no shortcut way. I can't just do a subtraction like I do with the angles. So my last part, I'll keep my initial ratio, okay, with angle B and side B. And just like I did in my second step, I'm just going to take my angle C and put it over the side. And the process will work the same way. I'll multiply my diagonal without the C, and I'll divide by what's in my diagonal with C. So we've got 13 times the sine of 45 divided by the sine of 39. And that's little c, and we're set. So yeah, it's definitely a process. It is. But once you get that basic law of sines and that first equation of law of cosines down, it's just kind of figuring out which part do I need to do for each one. It's absolutely like solving a puzzle, but the puzzle's not quite the same every time. So that's kind of where we are so far with the law of cosines. Now what I want to do before we get into other questions and kind of working with all this stuff is show you what happens if I get into one where, you know, they don't give me any angles. What if they just give me sides? How's this going to work? So for a moment, we are going to go into a delay. Now, you need to come with me on this. So you're like, oh, good, I'm going to just finish up the homework. No, come with me on this for right now to make sure you know what's going on. So, notice the formula has not changed. Okay? That's a good thing. What we can do then is we're going to be finding a different part though. On this particular part, instead of looking for side A, side B, or side C, we're going to use the same formula to try and find one of the angles. But the detail work increases in this particular unit. So here, when I go looking for the special parts in my triangle, you're like, oh, now, Artie, why you got to put this first part in here? Now you're telling me to use the biggest number, okay? So with law of sines, it's the smaller if you have a choice. With cosines, it needs to be the bigger one. And then we're going to work backwards from there. So here's how this will work. Okay, if we're using the biggest number, that means we're going to be finding angle A first. So I'm going to follow this top one. So A squared equals B squared plus C squared minus 2BC cosine of A. Now, I'm going to tell you right now and up front, you cannot plug this entire thing into your calculator in one step and hit enter, or you will mess it up. I have even messed it up by trying to do that. So here's what we are going to do. We're going to simplify everything before we even get into the solving of things. So we're going to break this out in pieces. All right, so 22 squared, I think, is 484. Okay. Now, I cannot put this whole thing in at once. just do the sum of the two squares first. And I'll explain why we've got to do it that way in just a minute. So that's 557. And then I'm going to multiply those three things together. So now, whether you look at that as -2, or if you do like I did, I put the minus in right away. If you do put the minus in right away, don't use the negative. If you didn't, then you can. And here's why I do this in pieces. When I get to here, what a lot of people would try to do here is they'd say, I'm going to do 557 minus 532, and then just divide my answer into the 484, which would be incorrect. Okay? Cosine of A and 532 are bonded together. So when I'm solving this, this would be the equivalent of me looking at something, if we kind of do an Algebra 1 flashback for a second, this would be the equivalent of having something like 8 equals 6 plus 4a. Okay, you wouldn't do 6 plus 4 first and then divide by 10. You'd subtract the 6, and then you'd go ahead and divide by 4. Well, that's the same thing we're going to do here. So we're going to minus the 557 first. Whoa. Calculator has gone crazy. Okay, who needs it? There. That's why I do all this stuff ahead. If I see it, there it is. So I've got -73 equals -532 cosine of A. And it literally has jammed up. Okay. So then, just like I would if I were solving an equation, I'm going to divide by the -532. Now, here is what we have to do that's a little bit different after the calculator comes back up, because technology is great until it doesn't work. All right, let's try this again, and I already know what's going to happen. It's going to be in the wrong mode. Hee hee. All right, now we're ready to get back to business. So I take my -73 divided by my -532. I get my funky little decimal. But I'm looking for an angle. So what am I going to have to do?
The inverse of cosine.
Yeah, I need to take the inverse of my cosine,
82.
and that value, and go ahead and get my angle. And it says for everything we're going to round to the nearest tenth. So my A is 82.1 degrees. So you kind of see why I've got to do it in pieces and not all at once, because that's just going to mess everything up. So now, though, I have a corresponding side and angle. So, again, it's law of sines. I only use the law of cosines for the very first step. So the sine of 82.1 over 22, oh, here comes the next test.
Smallest one.
Yes, okay, I have to use the smallest side.
14.
Use smallest side. So we are going to be finding angle C. Now the nice thing about this is, once I find angle C, I'm just going to subtract. I'm not going to have to do anything else fancy. So cross multiply, divide by whatever's with our sine C, and then the calculator's going to do its thing. So 14 times the sine of 82.1 divided by 22. And again, I'm using the law of sines now. So when I do this one, it's the inverse of sine. So there's lots of little detail things that can get you if you're not careful. So my C is 39.1. And then to get my third angle, which in this case is going to be B, you just take 180 minus the sum of the other two, which gives me 58.8. So that's why I'd mentioned up on the board, if you get into a situation like we had in the second part of the homework in the book, where it says use the law of sine or cosines or whatever, the way you tell is, do I have a corresponding side and angle? Well, if I have three sides, of course I'm not going to. It just wouldn't work out. Okay. So, one more of these, just to make sure we're on the right track here. We'll do two right next to it here. Swing this back over. Okay. All the concepts are going to be the same. So, which angle am I going to be finding first in number 2?
A.
A, because A's got the biggest side. So A is going to be the biggest angle. So A squared equals B squared plus C squared minus 2 times the product of my two sides times the cosine of, which will be my angle A. And again, do this in pieces. Yep, figure out your 39 squared first. Then again, just do the sum of your two squares next. It should be 925. Once you have that, then you can multiply this part together. And you'll always end up with minus something. And now we treat it like an Algebra 1 equation where I'm solving for A. So I have to isolate the A term before I can solve for it. So I can't just subtract these two. I'll minus the 925 over. And at this point, now I'm ready to say, okay, I'm going to do 596 over negative 756. Now, if some of you were wondering, well, as I'm doing this, you know, we've done the decimal every time. If I work this out this way, could I do the cosine and then just type the fraction in? Yes, you could. So either way, you're like, but what if I just want to keep doing it the other way? You absolutely can keep doing that. Just to let you see that the decimal will get me the same thing. If I do my second cosine with the decimal, okay, same exact thing. So it doesn't matter which way I do it. So now again, I've got my corresponding angle and side. And now it's off to the law of sines to finish off the rest of this. So again, I ask the question, am I going to be using side B or side C in my proportion? B, because again, once we get to law of sines, we've got to use the smallest side. So I'm going to be looking for the sine of B along with its side. So just like we did up here, multiply the non-side B diagonal and divide by whatever's with my sine B, and I believe, let me make sure, 14 times the sine of 142 divided by 39, and the inverse of sine, because again, only cosine on the first one. So my B is going to be 12.8 degrees. And again, to find that third one, just subtract the sum of the other two angles. All right, how are we doing right now? I need to know. Well, it's a process. It definitely is. And some of you are used to being able to either whip through something or not show work and be able to get from start to finish. That's not going to happen on these. So yep, this is how 16 and 20 are going to work from the homework. So I got one last thing that I want to take a look at. Since story problems seem to be our Achilles heel here, let's head over to the back. Actually, yeah, let's do number 8, because setting these up seems to be something that kind of gets us a little bit too.
Number what?
Okay, number 8 on the back here, the very last example. All right, so it looks like we have campsites A and B, and we have an office. Okay, so here's what I would do. You can't just automatically use A, B, and C every single time. Sometimes you have to adjust it depending on what you have. So let's see what we've got. Okay, Shady Pines Campground. Campsites A and B are situated 80 meters apart. So I'm going to start drawing this picture as I'm reading the question. The camp office, okay, that's going to be my third. So I guess I'm going to call that, I guess I could call it C for camp. I'll just call it O for office. Is 95 meters from campsite A. Okay, so this is office. 95 meters from campsite A and 115 from campsite B. When the ranger is standing in the office, what is the angle of separation between A and B? So I look and I go, okay, so am I going to be able to go for the angle right away?
No.
Unfortunately, it's not looking too good. So, which angle am I going to need to find first?
A.
I have to find A. Because here's my biggest side, and that corresponds with this angle. So that's going to be my first job.
Well, if you need the A.
So, A squared equals my other two sides squared, their sum, minus 2 times their product, times the cosine of my missing office angle. Actually, no, unfortunately for me it's not X, it's A. I'm trying to make it go shorter, but it's not. So I will give some assistance here as far as the number crunching goes, so we can kind of get you to the end and see what's happening here. The thing you've got to keep reminding yourself as you're working through these is, okay, I've got to take my time, because if I don't take my time now, I'm going to have to go back and do it all again anyway. So here, again, subtract this value to the other side. Don't try to combine these. So if I subtract that over, now you see why the engineers make the big bucks, having to go through all this detail work all the time. So I'd do negative 2200 divided by negative 15,200. And that's the value I'm going to plug in with my second cosine. Because again, I'm looking for an angle. So if I do that, I should end up with A being somewhere in the area here of 81.7 degrees. So it'd be second cosine in either the decimal form or that fraction itself. Once I get that value, now I can actually do what I want and get what I need. Because now I have a corresponding side and a corresponding angle. So to finish it off, I do the sine of angle A over the side of A. Same two formulas we're using here each time. But now I'm looking for, thankfully, this is my smaller number, side of the office over the sine of the angle that I'm actually looking for. So again, we just cross multiply. And divide by the side that has the sine of x with it. Again, make sure you're using sine this time. And it looks like the Ranger has about a 43.5 degree of separation. I was just going to mention, okay, to try and avoid overkill on this, just to kind of get you some practice. The Law of Cosines worksheet that you picked up on the way in today. I'm not going to keep pressing this. Well, yeah, sure, why not? So the Law of Cosines worksheet you picked up on the way in, the evens are going to be the assignment. The odds are going to be extra credit. When you come in tomorrow, we will discuss those, make sure we're going okay here, and then we're going to jump into the quiz preview and kind of start blending all this together. Yes, ma'am? For this one? Let me pause this.